The moment I realized I had been excluded from my cousin's wedding was one of those instances in life that makes your chest tighten and your stomach drop, like stepping off a ledge without warning. At first, it wasn't obvious. There was chatter in the family group chat about dresses, about colors, about whether the catering would lean more traditional or modern. There were updates about the decor, the venue, even small jokes about who would cry first during the ceremony. I kept scrolling, waiting for the day my own invitation would arrive in the mail, convincing myself it was just delayed. Everyone else seemed to already have theirs, but I told myself stories to keep the panic away. Maybe mine had been misplaced, maybe someone forgot to double-check my address, maybe it was still on its way. But denial only works until the truth finally stares you in the face, and when it did, it hit harder than I was ready for. It was at a family dinner, one of those gatherings where people pretend everything is normal even when something isn't. My aunt mentioned who she was sitting with, my siblings joked about coordinating outfits, and my cousin laughed about the playlist for the reception. I sat there, nodding, playing along, but deep inside a question burned like fire. Why had I not received anything? After the plates were cleared and conversations turned casual, I finally asked my mom. The words I got in return didn't just answer the question, they shattered something in me. "You're not invited. You'd ruin her day." That sentence echoed in my head like an alarm that wouldn't shut off. It wasn't just the exclusion that cut, it was the explanation. To be told that my mere presence was enough to spoil one of the happiest occasions in my cousin's life was a weight I hadn't prepared to carry. Shock doesn't always come in waves of tears or loud reactions. Sometimes it's the stillness that makes it worse. I sat there quietly, hearing the laughter of relatives in the background, their voices carrying excitement, while mine felt like it had been taken away. I replayed my mom's words over and over, trying to understand what she could have possibly meant. Was it something I had done in the past? Some moment I had forgotten about that she still held against me? Or was it simply that I didn't fit into the picture-perfect version of family she wanted to present that day? My heart thudded, my palms went cold, and yet no one else in the room seemed to notice the storm that had just erupted inside me. The shock spread further when I realized just how deliberate this exclusion was. It wasn't a mistake, it wasn't an oversight. Everyone else had their place reserved, their names printed beautifully on envelopes, their presence anticipated and welcomed. And then there was me, intentionally left out, as if I was a stain that couldn't be hidden by the decorations and smiles. The cruelty of it wasn't just that I wouldn't see my cousin walk down the aisle or join in the family photos, it was that someone had decided I was not worthy of belonging in that moment at all. It felt like being erased, like being told directly that no matter how much I considered myself part of the family, when it truly mattered, I wasn't. Even the small details deepened the shock. The way people avoided eye contact when I asked casual questions about the wedding. The way conversations stopped or changed when I entered the room. The way relatives who used to share everything suddenly became tight-lipped, as though they were carrying a secret they didn't want me to uncover. I could see pity in some eyes, discomfort in others, but no one said anything outright. That silence hurt almost as much as my mother's words. It was like being trapped in a glass box, seeing everything unfold clearly while knowing I wasn't allowed to step inside. I thought about the invitations themselves, those elegant envelopes with shining ink. The kind that people pin to their refrigerators or tuck into memory boxes to cherish later. Everyone in my family had one, a tangible reminder that they mattered, that they were wanted. I had nothing but silence. That difference was sharp, humiliating, and unforgettable. I felt stripped of a ritual of belonging, denied a role in a moment everyone else could carry forward in their stories and photographs. When people look back at this wedding, my absence will be invisible to most, but to me, it will always be the most glaring detail. The shock of being excluded wasn't just about a single day. It was about what it represented, that somewhere along the line, my place in the family had been deemed unnecessary, even disruptive. It showed me how fragile acceptance could be, how easily someone could decide that you didn't fit the version of happiness they wanted to display. And while the others would carry memories of music, food, and dancing, I would carry the memory of being told I wasn't good enough to be part of it at all. When my mother finally explained the reason I wasn't invited, the words carved into me in a way I can't describe without feeling them all over again. "You'd ruin her day." At first, I couldn't even comprehend it. It was such a casual statement, almost tossed out like it was the most obvious truth in the world, as if the idea of me being present was naturally disastrous. There was no hesitation in her voice, no softening, no attempt to disguise the cruelty. Just a blunt verdict that I was a threat to joy. Those words looped in my mind relentlessly, making me question everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my cousin, my family, and my own mother. What exactly about me could be so terrible that my presence would overshadow vows, flowers, and music? Why was I the person singled out as incompatible with celebration? I began replaying moments in my head, scanning through family interactions for clues. I thought of past arguments, the times I had spoken my mind too sharply, the times I had made mistakes like any other person. But then I thought of all the love I had also given, the support I had shown, the times I was there when others weren't. None of that seemed to matter in the calculation that had been made. My mother's reasoning seemed to reduce me to a single identity, the one who ruins things. To her, I wasn't a daughter who deserved to sit among relatives on one of the biggest family occasions. I was a liability, someone whose very existence threatened the carefully polished image she wanted for the wedding. The more I thought about it, the more I realized her words weren't just about the wedding day itself. They were about reputation, about control, about image. Weddings aren't just about two people getting married, especially in families like mine where appearances are treated like currency. Every detail is scrutinized, from the guest list to the outfits, and every person becomes part of the narrative the family wants to show the world. I began to suspect that my absence wasn't just for my cousin's sake, it was for my mother's peace of mind. To her, my presence represented unpredictability, maybe even shame. Maybe she thought I would say the wrong thing, act the wrong way, or simply not blend in with the glossy picture she wanted everyone to see. And instead of addressing those fears, instead of working with me to bridge them, she chose the easier path, exclusion. What hurt the most was the casualness of her decision. She didn't tremble when she told me, she didn't seem conflicted. It was almost as though she had convinced herself it was the most logical solution. In that moment, I realized just how small I was in her scale of priorities. The happiness of my cousin, the admiration of relatives, the opinions of outsiders, those were weightier than my dignity, my belonging, my feelings. It was a cruel trade-off, one I hadn't agreed to, but one she made on my behalf without hesitation. And it left me wondering how long she had seen me this way, as the one capable of ruining something just by existing in it. Was this an isolated judgment, or had she been carrying this perception of me for years? I remember standing in front of a mirror after that conversation, staring at my reflection as if the answer to her reasoning might be written on my face. I looked ordinary, just myself, nothing outrageous or destructive. Yet in her eyes, I was disruptive enough to cast a shadow over a day designed for joy. That disconnect made me question not only how she viewed me, but how the rest of my family did. Did they silently agree with her? Were they relieved I wouldn't be there, believing the wedding would be smoother without me? Or were they complicit only through their silence, too unwilling to challenge her declaration even if they thought it was unfair? Moments in life I had been left out of, not because of oversight, but because of deliberate choices like this one. How many times had plans been made where my presence was deemed inconvenient or risky? How many times had my absence been justified with the same dismissive attitude that I might ruin things simply by being there? It's one thing to be excluded for logistical reasons, another to be excluded because of who you are perceived to be. The latter lingers, it reshapes the way you see yourself and your place in the world. Every time I tried to rationalize her reasoning, I came up against a wall of hurt. If I had truly done something unforgivable, I could at least understand the distance, even if it was painful. But to be condemned in such vague, sweeping terms left me defenseless. I had no chance to prove otherwise, no chance to redeem myself, no clear explanation that I could learn from. It wasn't about a specific action. It was about me, my existence, my presence. That was the most painful part of it all. It made me feel like no matter what I did or how I tried, in her eyes, I would always be the person who ruins things. The sense of isolation that came with realizing I had been deliberately excluded from my cousin's wedding settled into me like a heavy fog that wouldn't lift. Isolation is not just being physically absent from a place, it's being made to feel like you don't belong, like your existence doesn't fit into the story unfolding around you. That was exactly how it felt as I watched my family plan and prepare for an event that was supposed to include everyone, yet somehow didn't include me. I could hear laughter in the background when relatives talked about fittings and rehearsals, but that laughter carried a reminder that I wasn't part of the circle. I could see the shared photos of centerpieces and dresses in group chats, but those images felt like invitations into a world where my name was purposely erased. The isolation didn't stay confined to the wedding plans, it spilled into my everyday life. I noticed the way conversations dimmed whenever I entered the room, as though people didn't know how to address the obvious truth without making me feel worse. Some relatives avoided talking to me altogether, not out of cruelty, but because they didn't know what to say. Others looked at me with a kind of quiet pity, the kind that stings even more than blunt rejection. It was as though I had become invisible, but in a painfully visible way, everyone knew I wasn't invited, and everyone knew I knew, yet no one dared to name it out loud. That silence only deepened the chasm between me and the rest of them. Family is supposed to be the place where you are unconditionally included, where you have a seat at the table no matter what flaws or mistakes you've made. To be told that I didn't belong at this celebration made me question whether I belonged in the family at all. Weddings are milestones that mark not just the union of two people, but the strength of the family around them, and to be pushed out of that circle made me feel like an outsider to my own blood. I started to think about other families I had seen, the ones who celebrated together no matter how imperfect they were, and I wondered why mine couldn't make room for me. The sense of being unwanted, of being considered a problem rather than a person, sank into me until it was hard to breathe in the same spaces with them. Isolation also came with a cruel irony. While I was excluded from the wedding, I couldn't escape it. The preparations filled the air in my home, the phone calls, the laughter, the discussions about outfits and rehearsals, they were everywhere. I was constantly reminded of the event I was not welcome at, and each reminder was another twist of the knife. I would catch my siblings giggling about plans or my relatives whispering about the guest list, and even when they tried to quiet down around me, the damage was already done. It felt like being trapped in a house where every window gave a view of a party you couldn't attend. I found myself withdrawing more and more, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't bear the reminder of what I had been excluded from. When I was around my family, I felt like a shadow, like someone occupying space, but not truly part of anything. Conversations felt forced, meals felt awkward, and I could sense the invisible wall between me and everyone else. I didn't want to lash out, didn't want to give them another reason to justify my exclusion, so I stayed quiet. But that silence became its own kind of prison. I had so many questions, so many feelings boiling inside me, but nowhere to put them, no one willing to truly listen. Even beyond the immediate family, the isolation followed me. Friends who knew about the wedding would casually ask what I was wearing or what role I had in the ceremony, and I would have to force a smile while explaining I wasn't going. Their shocked reactions only highlighted the abnormality of it all. People assumed family bonds were unshakable, that weddings were inclusive by nature, and having to explain my absence felt humiliating. It made me shrink further into myself, as though even the outside world would judge me for being deemed unworthy of attending. What struck me the most during that time was how easily people accepted my absence. No one openly fought for me to be included. No one insisted that it was wrong to leave me out. That quiet compliance from those who claimed to care about me was almost as painful as my mother's harsh words. It showed me that my place in the family wasn't secure, that when it came down to it, I was the first person. That kind of isolation doesn't end with one event, it lingers, shaping the way you see yourself in every future gathering, every holiday, every so-called family moment. It teaches you to expect exclusion, to brace yourself for invisibility, and to wonder if you will ever truly belong anywhere at all. The silent glances and unspoken pity from relatives were among the hardest things to endure because they carried truths that no one was willing to say out loud. It wasn't just that I had been excluded from the wedding, it was that everyone knew and chose to deal with it through avoidance. Whenever I walked into a room, there was a shift in energy that I couldn't ignore. Conversations that had been light and free suddenly slowed or stopped. Eyes darted away from mine, or lingered on me too long with a look that was hard to misinterpret. Those looks weren't filled with love or reassurance. They were heavy with discomfort, as if people were silently acknowledging the wrong done to me but had no intention of addressing it. That unspoken pity settled over me like an unwanted cloak I couldn't take off. At family gatherings leading up to the wedding, I could see the way relatives carefully measured their words around me. They spoke openly about the venue, the guest list, and the plans when I wasn't in the room, but when I entered, the subject shifted to something trivial, like the weather or food. Their effort to tiptoe around me only highlighted the truth they were trying to hide. It was as if they believed I couldn't handle hearing about the celebration, as though pretending the wedding didn't exist in my presence. It made me feel like I was being treated as fragile, as though my exclusion had reduced me to someone incapable of holding her head up, someone who should be pitied rather than respected. Even worse were the few relatives who attempted to make small gestures of comfort. A squeeze of the hand, a sympathetic smile, or a comment like, "Don't take it too hard," only reminded me of my isolation. Their attempts at kindness weren't rooted in challenging the injustice of the situation, but in smoothing it over, as though my pain was an inconvenience they needed to quietly manage. It was easier for them to show pity than to confront the truth, that they were all attending a family event I was barred from, and none of them had the courage to speak up on my behalf. Their silence became complicity, and their pity felt like a reminder of my powerlessness. What made those silent glances unbearable was how they stripped me of dignity. When people look at you with pity, they're not seeing you as an equal. They're seeing you as someone broken, someone beneath them in that moment, someone who doesn't quite measure up. I could feel it in the way they avoided eye contact when they talked about the wedding details, or the way they quickly filled pauses with meaningless chatter, as if to cover up the truth pressing in on all of us. They knew I had been wronged, they knew I had been treated unfairly, but none of them were brave enough to name it. Instead, they left me to carry the burden alone, their glances serving as reminders that they knew but wouldn't act. There were moments I wanted to shout, to break the silence they were all hiding behind. I wanted to ask them why they could look me in the eye and still prepare to smile in photographs at an event I was banned from. I wanted to demand why none of them thought my exclusion mattered enough to protest. But every time the words rose in my throat, I swallowed them back, afraid of creating even more distance between myself and the people I was already losing. Their silence boxed me in, leaving me with no outlet to express the rage and sadness that had nowhere to go. In many ways, those silent glances were more painful than outright rejection would have been. At least rejection is clear, at least it names what it is. But pity is murky. It keeps you in a half space where no one denies your pain, but no one validates it either. It's an acknowledgement without action, a recognition without responsibility. It forces you to live with the knowledge that people see your suffering and choose to do nothing, because their comfort matters more than your hurt. Over time, I began to anticipate those glances, almost as if I could feel them before they happened. I learned to brace myself when someone entered the room, to recognize the tightening of their lips or the way their smile didn't reach their eyes. It became a cycle that fed the isolation already gnawing at me, because even when I tried to ignore it, I couldn't escape the weight of being silently pitied by people I once trusted to stand beside me. It created a fracture in my relationship with them that felt permanent, a divide where trust had once been. Because once you know that people can look at you with sympathy yet refuse to stand up for you, you can never unsee it. You carry that knowledge with you, and it changes how you see them forever. The struggle between wanting to defend myself and choosing to stay silent became one of the most exhausting battles I had to fight within myself. After hearing my mother say that I wasn't invited because I would ruin her day, there was a fire inside me that screamed to be heard, to argue, to prove that I was not the person she made me out to be. Every part of me wanted to stand tall and demand an explanation, to confront not only her but the entire family about why I was being treated as if my presence was poisonous. But at the same time, another part of me whispered that saying anything would only make things worse, that defending myself would be twisted into proof that I was exactly the kind of person they accused me of being. That fear kept me silent, even as my heart begged to speak. Every time I imagined myself speaking out, the scenes would play out in my head like rehearsals. I would picture myself confronting my mother, asking her how she could call me her child and still strip me of my place at a family celebration. I would picture myself standing up at a family gathering, exposing the hypocrisy of people who claimed to love me but had no problem leaving me behind. In my head, my words were sharp and clear, and for a moment I could feel the relief of speaking the truth. But then reality would intrude, reminding me of how easily my family dismissed me before. I feared that if I tried to defend myself, my anger would be dismissed as proof of why I didn't belong. I feared my pain would be mocked or trivialized, turned into a story of me being dramatic rather than mistreated. That fear of being further humiliated silenced me more effectively than any command could. There were times when silence felt like self-protection, a way to hold on to what little dignity I had left. If I stayed quiet, at least I couldn't give anyone more ammunition against me. I told myself that maybe if I didn't react, they would eventually see how unfairly I had been treated, that my calm would reveal more than my anger ever could. But that silence came at a cost. The words I swallowed didn't disappear. They festered inside me, building pressure like steam in a closed container. I could feel it in the way my chest tightened when I overheard relatives talking about the wedding, or in the way my throat burned when my siblings excitedly compared outfits. I wanted so badly to join in, to say something, anything, that would remind them I was still part of the family, but the fear of rejection kept the words locked inside. The hardest part of this struggle was how it made me question myself. Was I really the problem, as they said? If I tried to defend myself, would I only be proving them right? These questions haunted me, making me second-guess every feeling and every thought. It was as though I was standing on trial, but the jury was already convinced of my guilt. To defend myself felt like fighting against a verdict that had already been passed, a fight I couldn't win no matter how hard I tried. That hopelessness was paralyzing, leaving me trapped between the desire to scream my truth and the fear that it wouldn't matter. At night, when I was alone, the words I never spoke would spill out in whispers. I would talk to myself in the mirror, or into the empty air of my room, saying the things I couldn't say to anyone else. I would ask the questions that went unanswered. Why wasn't I enough? Why was my presence considered a burden? Why didn't anyone fight for me? These late-night conversations were my only outlet, but they offered no closure, only a reminder of everything I couldn't express to the people who needed to hear it most. The silence I chose wasn't just about protecting myself, it was also about protecting them. Deep down, I knew that if I spoke out, I could cause rifts in the family that might never heal. I could ruin the fragile harmony they were so desperate to preserve around the wedding. My words might have forced people to pick sides, to acknowledge truths they preferred to keep hidden. And as much as I wanted to stand up for myself, I couldn't bear the idea of being blamed for tearing the family apart even further. In a twisted way, my silence became a sacrifice, a way of carrying the weight alone so others could remain comfortable. But carrying that weight alone left scars that silence couldn't hide. Every time I bit back words that ached to be spoken, I felt myself shrinking a little more, becoming smaller, more invisible. Silence became a habit, a cage I locked myself in, even though I held the key. The struggle between defending myself and staying silent wasn't just about the wedding, it was about my identity, my voice, my worth. It showed me how easy it was to be silenced by fear, and how hard it was to fight for myself when the people who should have believed in me had already turned away. The realization that my worth was being judged by how well I fit into my family's carefully curated image didn't leave me when the wedding music stopped and the guests went home. It settled into me like a dull ache that became part of my daily rhythm. It started as a sting, a moment of humiliation when I understood that smiles and congratulations could be selective, but over time it hardened into a scar that changed how I moved through rooms, how I chose my words, how I gauged whether I belonged. Where once I had assumed my place in the family was unconditional, I now saw it as conditional, earned by behaving in ways that were acceptable to others, measured against an invisible checklist of manners, appearances, and public calm. That revelation was corrosive because it meant my value had never been intrinsic in their eyes. It depended on whether I helped keep up appearances. That knowledge altered relationships in small, steady ways. I started watching for tests, A gathering where my presence might be tolerated but only if I stayed small, a joke that could be sharp enough to expose me if I responded, a photo where my expression might be judged. I found myself performing restraint instead of being myself, calibrating my reactions to avoid giving anyone more reason to mark me as disruptive. It was exhausting work, an invisible labor of editing and censoring, and every time I shelved a comment or swallowed in anger, the scar tightened. I was practicing survival, but the cost was authenticity. The person I became in those rooms was a version of me safe enough to be allowed, rather than the whole of me. The long-term effect was a kind of mistrust that didn't feel dramatic at first. I still loved them, still reached out for birthdays and holidays, but there was an undercurrent of caution. I hesitated before sharing news, measuring whether it would make them proud or nervous. I learned to ask myself whether telling the truth about my life would make me more human to them or simply more inconvenient. That calculation of whether my existence would contribute positively to the family image became a filter for how honest I could be. It turned relationships into negotiations. Even moments that should have felt natural and warm were threaded with the memory that my worth could be dismissed on a whim. There were practical consequences too. I stopped expecting support when I needed it most. If acceptance could be revoked over the perceived risk of ruining a day, I doubted whether anyone would stand with me in harder times. That doubt made me pull away when I might have leaned in, made me build a quieter life where my vulnerabilities were shared selectively. I learned to cultivate outside friendships and communities where my presence was not a blemish on someone else's reputation, but an asset, a place where being myself didn't come with a price. In those spaces, I began to relearn how to be seen without calculation, but the family scar followed me, a reminder that belonging can be provisional. It also made me reevaluate what family meant. At first, I mourned the loss of the imagined, cohesive kinship I'd counted on. Later, grief shifted into a kind of clarity. Families are human systems with politics, hierarchies, and fragilities. Acceptance from them is neither guaranteed nor always healthy. That awareness freed me to set boundaries I should have set earlier, to protect myself from being used as a prop for someone else's narrative of perfection. Setting those boundaries felt like both relief and rebellion. Relief, because I wasn't waiting to be invited into moments that would sting me. Rebellion, because I refused to let their image-making continue to determine my sense of worth. Healing, when it came, was uneven. There were days when I would look in the mirror and remember my mother's words and feel the old hurt as fresh as ever. Then there were small victories, a friend who celebrated me without reservation, a decision I made that honored my own values rather than the family's aesthetics, an unexpected compliment that landed with real warmth. Those moments accumulated more weight than the criticisms did. Slowly, I found a sturdier measure for my worth, one based on my actions, my integrity, and the love I gave, not on whether I fit into someone else's ideal photograph. Still, the scar remains visible if I pay attention. It shows up as a flinch when someone schedules a big family event or a skepticism when praise comes with qualifiers. But it has also taught me something indispensable, that worth judged by appearances is brittle, and that reclaiming my value requires living in ways that reflect what I truly care about. It means prioritizing relationships that hold me during storms rather than those that applaud only sunny days, and it means teaching myself to recognize the difference between belonging for who I am and belonging because I'm useful to someone else's image. That lesson isn't neat or painless, but it is real, and it guides how I choose to show up now, in gatherings big and small, with a quieter confidence that my presence is not, and will not be, negotiable for the sake of someone's show of perfection.